Welcome everyone to the Poster Symposium. Okay, people I'm sure will still trickle in here, but we can go ahead and get going. Welcome to the CivicSpark Poster Symposium series celebrating the accomplishments of the 2021-22 CivicSpark Fellow Cohort. My name is Daniel Keim, and I am the Greater Sacramento / Sierra Regional Coordinator for CivicSpark, which is a national service program of CivicWell. And I, along with my partner in crime today, Ann Shalamoff, will be facilitating today's session for the second half of the Affordable Housing Network group. And a few logistical details before we get started, just as a reminder for fellows who are presenting. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's call, please message me directly using the chat feature and I'll help troubleshoot. Everyone will have around 5 to 6 minutes to present their capstone posters and any supplementary slides. Their posters are going to summarize key accomplishments from their 11 months of AmeriCorps service to local governments across California. Very exciting. And after each presentation, we're going to open it up for a couple questions from the audience, which you can ask either directly by unmuting yourself or sending through the chat for one of us to read off. And then, yeah, finally, I would love to encourage audience participation through the virtual event, not just with questions, but if you want to just offer encouragement or congratulations or just kudos in general for the fellows in the chat box, that's obviously very much encouraged. This is a big celebration of them after all. So yeah, I guess we can get the show on the road here. Without further ado, we're going to start today with Nathan White, who is serving with the county of Tulare, and then followed up by Isaac Landman with the town of Truckee. So Nathan, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan White. I've been serving with the Tulare County Resource Management Agency, and my main project this year has been working on the housing element update. So what is a housing element? Most of you are already probably familiar with housing elements, but I'll give a brief description. A housing element is a comprehensive assessment of current and future housing needs for all segments of the population, as well as a policy guide to meet these needs. It also needs to be updated every 5 or 8 years to be compliant. And a compliant housing element is important because it's required in many grant applications, funding programs relating to housing, transportation, and infrastructure. So what does a housing element consist of? I've listed the main inputs or components of a housing element. There's background information, which is research, stakeholder community engagement, fulfilling state requirements, policies and programs, and an assessment of adequate sites. So what have I accomplished this year? I haven't finished the housing element, but I've completed a majority of the work. As you can see here, I've completed chapters 1, 3, and 4, which consisted of updating 123 pages, 77 tables, and 9 charts. So chapter 1 was just the introduction chapter. Chapter 3 was an assessment of housing needs. So this included researching relevant topics such as population trends, poverty rates, overcrowding, overpayment, special needs groups such as farm workers. And to find this information, I searched through a number of different online sources and I contacted employees within my department. The main sources I used online were the Census Bureau, American Community Survey, and the Department of Finance. And so chapter 4 was just the housing constraints. It's an analysis of constraints to housing production. It includes topics such as permit fees and processing times, building codes and construction costs. I've partially completed chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a review of the progress made since the previous element, and it also includes awards received from funding programs in recent years and information on local housing organizations. And additionally, I've started a fair housing chapter. So, well, the full name is Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. So as a result of AB 686 in 2018, there are additional requirements for housing elements relating to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So I've completed most of the research for the assessment of fair housing, but there's still a couple of other sections. There's the outreach, identifying contributing factors, and the policies and programs. So what are the next steps? The next steps are to organizing a housing element committee to discuss the policies and programs in the housing element, which is chapter 6. Like I said before, finishing chapter 5 and the fair housing chapter, starting the community outreach process for the housing element, and finishing chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the adequate sites chapter, and a consultant is doing most of that work. So I finished this presentation a little bit quicker than I did when I was practicing it. I think we can move on to the question slide at the very end. You can just skip that slide right there. So yeah, so I know that was a little bit vague. The housing element is difficult to describe because our housing element, for example, is over 300 pages. So, but this will give you an overview of what it's like to be working on a housing element, especially if any of you become urban planners and are working on one of these general plan elements.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan, and congrats on a successful year of service. So yeah, we can go ahead and open it up to questions now from the audience. And it looks like Isaac, you've got a question, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, great presentation. My question is really, I'm wondering what you found to be the most interesting thing you worked on this year, or part of the housing element that you got to investigate.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd say, well, the biggest thing I've been working on with the housing element is research, which actually surprised me. So most of the housing element is research. And the policies and programs section that I briefly mentioned, that's based on the research that you're doing in the other chapters. So as far as, it's hard to say, it's just hard to say what the most interesting part was. It's hard to choose. I was working on several different aspects of it. But I would say probably seeing how the chapters all relate to each other, because at the beginning I was just working on the separate chapters and I didn't really see how they connected. But now as I'm finishing the year, I see how they're all related together. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Isaac. And yeah, if folks want to enter any questions in the chat or just unmute. Oh, it looks like we've got one in the chat from Mackenzie. Nathan, are you wanting to continue working on housing for your next steps after CivicSpark?
I'm figuring that out right now. You know, there's things that I like about it and don't like. With, you know, working in planning, urban planning, there's a lot of bureaucracy, government moves slow. There's so many requirements that you need to know. So I'm going to take a break after this from the work that I've been doing. So if I do go back into this field, it'll be after a few months for me to think about it and reflect.
Awesome. Yes. Well, great. Yeah. Thanks again, Nathan. Awesome presentation. And yeah, we can go ahead and move right along here. I think our next presenter will be Isaac Landman, who was serving with the town of Truckee, and then followed by Isaac will be Lizzy Havey with the city of Arvin. Go ahead, Isaac, take it away.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so for my presentation, I'll be going over the short-term rental, or STR, program study and ordinance update that was conducted by the town of Truckee. And I'll be discussing what my role was through that process in support. So following the institution of annual registration and operational requirements for STRs in Truckee in 2020, and the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Town Council directed staff to examine potential updates to the STR program as part of the town's multifaceted strategy to address an increasing housing shortage. So if you see in that top left graphic, in a 2021 study, we found that there were about 2,500 needed workforce housing units in Truckee. So the goal of the short-term rental program study and eventual ordinance update was to proactively manage the short-term rental registration program as a tool to help maintain the supply of housing that is affordable to the regional workforce here in Truckee and the North Lake Tahoe area. So to achieve that goal, we took a kind of three-pronged approach. The first was to study Truckee's short-term rentals, so study all the data we had available. The second, and as part of that as well, was to look into potential management techniques. So look at how we might, what kinds of tools are available to manage short-term rentals. The second was to convene a short-term rental advisory committee of stakeholders to look at the data and management tools that we were investigating. And the third was to poll the community on this topic. And all of that information was used to produce recommendations for town council. My role was to focus on how other communities that are comparable to Truckee manage short-term rentals. So my method was first to identify comparable communities with various short-term rental management approaches, and then to investigate those management styles, their effectiveness, the lessons learned that those jurisdictions have discovered as they've been managing short-term rentals. My research was largely based online and in interviews, and then I summarized my findings into a matrix, and then those findings were used to inform our advisory committee. They informed the recommendations that staff wound up putting together for town council, and ultimately had some influence on the changes to the short-term rental ordinance that town council adopted. So the regulations that were adopted, the new regulations adopted and the updates to the short-term rental ordinance were first to institute a town-wide cap of 1,255 transient occupancy registration certificates, which are the permits that allow homeowners to operate an STR. And as part of that, create a waitlist process for homeowners who would like to access registration certificates once that cap has been reached. Second, to prohibit the issuance of new registration certificates to homeowners of multifamily type housing units. And third, to require a 1-year waiting period following the transfer of property the transfer of property ownership before that new homeowner is eligible to receive a registration certificate. Next slide, please. So I'd also like to highlight an offshoot program that I've been responsible for developing, which was first thought of during one of our advisory committee meetings. The idea for this token program, which is what we're calling it, fits within our current structure, in which the vast majority of registration certificates for short-term rentals will be accessed through the regular application process, which is, a homeowner who wants a permit can apply for one, and if one is available under the townwide cap and they are eligible, they'll receive it, or they'll be placed on a wait list. This new offshoot program which town council has decided to allocate 25 certificates to as an initial allocation, has a set aside pool that can be accessed without having to go through that waitlist process. Next slide, please. So this set aside pool can only be accessed by individuals or businesses who create workforce housing. In exchange, they'll receive a token, which is redeemable on a one-to-one basis for a registration certificate, which remember is a permit that allows you to operate a short-term rental, which is like an Airbnb or a VRBL. Program participants will be issued a number of tokens with a set expiration date, with which they can redeem themselves to operate an STR property, or they can transfer to someone else who would then be able to redeem the token for a property of their own. So to sum that up, a program applicant will say, hey, hey, town of Truckee, I'm willing to provide 10 workforce housing units. And the town will look at that application and say, okay, in exchange for 10 workforce housing units, we will give you X number of tokens for a Y period of time, which will mean you can operate X number of short-term rentals for a Y period of time. This is a unique and new program, and it's really been exciting for me to work on. One of the aspects that I find the most interesting is that this leverages the town's ability to regulate the number of short-term rentals that can operate in Truckee, and offers a piece of that scarcity in exchange for deed-restricted workforce housing. So essentially, it incentivizes the private sector to get involved in workforce housing solutions with no cost, virtually no cost to town or taxpayers other than staff time. So that's my presentation. If you want to go to the last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Isaac. And congrats on an amazing year of service. And yeah, we can open up to questions now. We've already got one in the chat, it looks like, from Christine. Hi, Christine from SJCOG. It looks like their question is there an enforcement component to the STR program?
Thanks for the question. There is. We have as part of that 2020 regulation, an entire short-term rental division was opened up at the town to enforce things like nuisance regulations, make sure that short-term rentals have the proper trash and bare bins, that they're not creating noise complaints. And on top of that, as part of these new regulations have rolled out, they have found ways to regulate like the townwide caps. So they're updating the waitlist program. They're updating the ways that we register short-term rentals with the town. So all of that is kind of being rolled in to the town's STR management.
Awesome. And then it looks like we have a question from Kaylee as well. Let's see. Can you share about the advisory committee? Who was involved, and do you have any highlights to share about working with them?
Yeah, thanks, Kaylee. The advisory committee was one of the things that I found really interesting in watching and observing and listening to how the advisory committee was formed. Was the focus was really to have a balance of perspectives. So there were a number of, I think there were 10 people on the committee. There were 3 or 4 who had some sort of stake in the short-term rental business. So we had a property, we had 1 or 2 property management company owners. We had a short-term rental operator, like a member of the public who was a short-term rental operator, and then someone else who, I can't remember. We had a couple members of folks, just members at large, so active community members. And then we also had folks kind of on the other side, like housing advocates. And we had some town council members. So it was really interesting to have that balance of perspective of like the folks who you would expect to be more pro short-term rental or anti-regulation maybe, and then folks who are more pro-regulation. It actually, what I thought was interesting was some of our most creative and most most outspoken advocates for really thoughtful regulation were folks who was one property management owner in particular who kind of agreed that short-term rentals were were contributing to increased housing prices, and that thoughtfully regulating them might be able to address that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for the questions, everyone. And thank you, Isaac, for the presentation, awesome presentation. And congrats again on a successful year of service with Truckee. We're going to actually go next to Grant, who's serving with Ventura County. And then, yeah, hopefully we can bring Lizzy back in maybe at the end. So yeah, Grant, go ahead and you can take it away now.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, my name is Grant Sles, and I served with the Ventura County Resource Management Agency. And my projects were focused on implementing affordable housing programs included in the county's new housing element that was adopted last year. And to set the stage, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ventura County's housing crisis. Simply put, housing is expensive and there isn't enough to meet demand. In fact, researchers have found that the Oxnard, Thousand Oaks, Ventura metro area has an 11% shortage of housing units, which is the highest in the nation. On top of that, 58% of Ventura County renters are rent burdened, meaning that they spend 30% or more of their income on housing. And these problems are even worse for they're even more severe for low income households, especially households headed by farm workers. And this means that low income households and farm worker households are often forced to live in low quality and overcrowded housing. To combat these issues, the county has developed many programs to help encourage more housing development. And some of these programs are focused on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and farm worker housing units, which are expected to satisfy nearly half of the county's RHNA targets. So my main project this year was to create practical tools and public information materials that simplify the permitting processes for ADUs and farm worker housing units. I started the year by familiarizing myself with relevant state laws and local zoning ordinances, which was challenging because the state provided little guidance on how to implement new requirements for ADUs. The county had just adopted the new agricultural worker housing ordinance, and the county was still in the process of updating its ADU ordinance. But after months of coordinating with other agencies and legal counsel, the county has developed a near final draft of the ADU ordinance that has guided my project work throughout the year. So after that phase, I researched best practices in other jurisdictions to help develop a plan for Ventura County. Considering how successful guidebooks and standardized building plans have been in other cities and counties, I decided that this would be one of the most effective ways to promote ADU and farm worker housing development in Ventura County. And I spent most of my service year developing these materials. So by this point in the service year, I have developed a draft ADU guidebook, which walks property owners through the permitting process, summarizes building standards, and outlines the benefits of ADUs. And I also developed a separate guidebook for agricultural worker housing, which outlines each of the 4 types of farm worker housing that can be built in the county. And lastly, I coordinated an interagency effort to update the county's standardized building plans. And these plans can be used to build both ADUs and farm worker dwelling units. And the county anticipates that they're going to be really popular among property owners since they are somewhat customizable and they save time and money during the permitting process. So all of these deliverables have resulted in 2 major outcomes. The first is streamlining ADU and farm worker housing development by simplifying the permitting process. And the second is increasing understanding among county staff regarding implementation of the new ordinances. And together, these outcomes will lead to the development of more high quality affordable units in unincorporated areas of Ventura County. But some important next steps for the county include translating all materials into Spanish and monitoring the affordability of ADUs and farm worker housing units. Doing so will ensure that these programs are accessible to the county's large Spanish-speaking population and that they are producing affordable units as intended. So while I can't showcase all the materials that I worked on, I wanted to highlight a few parts so that everyone has a better idea of what they look like. Next slide, please. Here's the first page of the agricultural worker housing guidebook. And as I mentioned before, this guidebook summarizes the 4 types of farm worker housing allowed in the county, including farm worker housing complexes like those pictured in the bottom left. Next slide, please. And second, I have the rendering of the 3-bedroom standardized building plan, which kind of brings the plan to life a little bit and explains what features can be customized. Next, please. And then lastly, I have one of the pages from the ADU guidebook, which helps property owners understand which type of permit they will need to apply for based on the new ADU ordinance. And as you can see, it can be kind of a complex question. And in closing, I just wanted to thank CivicWell, my regional coordinator, Skylar Johnson, Ventura County, and of course, my site supervisor, Ruchita Kadakia, for enabling me to be part of this impactful project that has allowed me to grow personally and professionally. I hope my work leads to the creation of beautiful and affordable homes for those most in need in Ventura County. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Grant, for the presentation. Congrats on a successful year of service. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think one actually came in during your presentation, Grant. Yeah, from Anne. What is a farm worker dwelling unit and how is it different from an ADU?
Yeah, so farm worker dwelling units can only be built in agricultural, in areas that are zoned for agricultural purposes. So what makes it different than an ADU, because honestly, they kind of look the same, but what makes it different is that it can only be occupied by people who work in agriculture, and that has to be proven when the permit is issued. And yeah, they can only be built on agricultural properties. So you're going to see them in more rural areas, whereas ADUs can be pretty much in any residentially zoned areas.
Awesome. And it looks like another question came in from Christine. How do the tools help with ADU and farm worker unit production?
The intention is, well, so the ordinances themselves are really difficult to navigate. And when people come to the counter, they tend to have a lot of questions because they're just really hard to understand. So the tools basically summarize that in a way that's like easier for people to understand. And in doing so, and it also in a way like advertises the programs so that people like want to build ADUs and farm worker housing units. So yeah, by simplifying the permitting process and making it more user-friendly, that is how we hope that these will produce more units.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the questions, everybody. And thanks for the encouraging comments as well. And Grant, thank you for the amazing presentation. And yeah, a very successful year of service. Congrats. And we will keep things moving right along. So next up is Angela Carranza, serving with the San Joaquin Council of Governments, or SJCOG. And then Angela's going to be followed by Emily Kehl with Reinvent South Stockton Coalition. So yeah, Angela, go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Angela Carranza. My service site was San Joaquin Council of Government, which is a joint power authority comprised of the County of San Joaquin and its cities. My main project consisted of regional housing planning activities. My role was to assist with housing priorities and activities, specifically the development of a regional housing trust fund. So back in February of 2020, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, released a notice of funding availability for the Regional Early Action Planning, REAP grant, which would be a one-time grant funding for approximately $2.4 million for regional and local planning, housing planning activities to accelerate housing production and facilitate implementing the 6th cycle of the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA. And a note that the $2.4 million is a specific amount dedicated towards SJCOG. Later that year, SJCOG adopted regional housing priorities that would advance through REAP funds. One of these priorities was the development of a regional housing trust fund. A sort of simple definition for a housing trust fund would be a financial mechanism for supporting and preserving affordable housing. This is more flexible than state and federal funding, as the program can be tailored to requirements that address specific needs within the community that it would be used, whether that be by a city, a county, or a region. In order to sort of fulfill this housing priority, SJCOG first needed to assess whether they were an appropriate facilitator for this trust fund, which comes to conducting a feasibility study. This feasibility study would address tasks such as reviewing existing affordable housing financial policies, identify potential mechanisms for generating dedicated revenue, conducting a needs assessment to inform and programming priorities, assist with a conveying steering committee, and develop an administrative plan for the Regional Housing Trust Fund. This feasibility study is currently in production. It's currently being conducted. After the completion of the study, SJCOG plans to review the study and its next steps presented to its committee and stakeholders. And depending on the outcome of the study, either adopt its administrative plans and bylaws or look into who is best suited for a trust fund for the region. Next slide. Going into a little bit of the specifics of the process of being able to conduct this feasibility study, SJCOG first needed to develop a sort of scope of work, which was then added into a request for proposal, which was then released in order to obtain a consultant team to conduct this study. Within the scope of work, we seeked to do some research and preparation for a steering committee, identify participating jurisdictions for that steering committee and hold its meetings, have a needs assessment, a financial feasibility analysis, as well as establishing state legislatives and next steps, developing an administrative plan, bylaws and implementation plans, the formation of a joint powers agreement, as well as just general project management and grant administration. Next slide. The process for this request for proposal started back in January with the release of the RFP. Within February, we had an initial deadline for the RFP, but due to sort of few responses, we then in March extended the deadline. In April through March, we had a review process of these proposals with a board meeting in April, which awarded the contract to HRNA, and then a kickoff meeting in May. Next slide. So throughout this process, there are a few recommendations that I wanted to add to this presentation. First, initial research is key. It's important to sort of ask some questions about whether your county or city already has a housing trust fund and whether an agency has the capability of establishing this housing trust fund. Equally as important is the continuous sort of research and feedback that one needs. It's important to assess whether jurisdiction knows what a housing trust fund is, agrees with establishing a housing trust fund, and gauging whether there is support from jurisdictions and stakeholders. Next slide. That is the end of my presentation. Is there any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. Incredible presentation. And yeah, anyone, if they have questions, you can unmute or share them in the chat. I actually have a question for you, Angela. So yeah, you'll be back with SJCOG for next year, which is super exciting. I'm just curious, like you've been able to do some amazing work this year. Like, what are you looking forward to most next year with your work with them?
Next year, I'm looking forward to sort of focusing on a different aspect of this service year has been mostly housing related. So, and a part of this service year have worked on equity work. So next year it will kind of flip flop. So I'll be focusing on the equity work that was sort of not as prioritized this term. And then hopefully still do some housing work, but it will not be as much as my priority. So I look forward to expanding on what I did accomplish this service year, but wasn't the main focus.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like a question has come in from your supervisor. What was the most challenging part of your project work?
I guess I would say the most challenging part of it was that I did not come in necessarily with a housing background. So I had a lot of the stuff housing related I needed to sort of learn from scratch. There was a lot of reading and sort of webinars that I needed to attend in order to get stuff that felt kind of like stuff that everybody else around me already knew. But, you know, I'm very thankful for the team that I had and for the amount of work I was able to accomplish and all of the information I was able to gain throughout the process as well.
Awesome. Yes, a lot to learn. Yeah, I feel like I have learned from a lot of you all through our network, and I have barely scraped the surface for sure as well. Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. Amazing presentation. And yeah, we can, I guess, move right along to Emily Kehl, who's serving with Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, or RSSC. And then Emily is going to be followed up by Maeve Robinson with Placer County Housing and Transportation. So Emily, go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Thank you. So my name is Emily Kehl. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently serving with the San Joaquin County Continuum of Care and also the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, which is a nonprofit collective impact organization. So throughout my service term, my work has mainly focused on improving the use of housing choice vouchers in San Joaquin County. And before I get started, I want to provide some brief background information on vouchers for anyone who's not super familiar with them, because they can be kind of nuanced. So a housing choice voucher, which was formerly referred to as a Section 8 voucher, is what's called a tenant-based voucher. And this means that a resident who's been granted a housing choice voucher by their local housing authority is responsible for finding their own unit and their own rental property that's willing to accept the voucher. And due to San Joaquin County's low vacancy rate, a lot of residents struggle to find a landlord that will actually allow them to utilize the voucher once they're granted the voucher from our housing authority. And this is a really unfortunate situation because it means that although a resident may be granted a voucher after being on the wait list for years in some cases, they're going to continue to experience homelessness or housing insecurity until they're able to locate a unit that will allow them to use the voucher. And many other regions in California experience really similar issues due to low vacancy rates all across the state. So the Housing Authority of San Joaquin County has already taken several steps to help alleviate the stress that voucher holders experience when they're attempting to locate a unit. So right now, our Housing Authority utilizes what's called local preferences to give extra assistance to specifically locally identified populations. So these local preferences allow the Housing Authority to basically give extra points to applicants who are either exiting homeless or transitional housing, or meet other specific demographic criteria. And this helps some individuals get off the wait list more quickly and get the voucher a little bit faster. So our housing authority also has what's called a lease in place preference, and that applies to residents who have an active lease that can be transferred to the new tenant-based voucher once they're awarded the voucher. And then finally, in November of 2021, our housing authority also announced its new landlord incentive program, which offers landlords a one-time leasing bonus, vacancy loss payments, and security deposit assistance of up to $2,000. And this program aims to get more landlords to participate in the housing choice voucher program, which will in turn make more units available to voucher holders. And then lastly, our housing authority also employs 2 housing navigators who assist voucher holders with locating available units. And then some additional policies that the Housing Authority might explore to improve the Housing Choice Voucher program include what's called a project-based voucher set aside. So this is option 1, or additional local enhancements that can be made to the program. And this is option 2. So option 1, a project-based voucher set aside. A project-based voucher is just a different type of voucher that's allocated by HUD to local housing authorities. So up to 30% of vouchers allocated to a housing authority by HUD can be converted to project-based vouchers if the housing authority chooses. So this means that a voucher holder wouldn't have to locate their own unit to accept the voucher. The unit would already be available and set aside specifically for housing authority tenants. And this is where what's called turnover vouchers come into play. So when a voucher holder exits the Housing Choice Voucher program for any reason, their previous voucher will return to the housing authority, and then these turnover vouchers are made available to new residents as they're removed from the waitlist and enter into the program. So housing authorities in surrounding areas like the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agencies have developed strategies in which these turnover vouchers are reserved and then converted into project-based vouchers. So I propose that our housing authority in San Joaquin County take similar steps to convert turnover vouchers into project-based vouchers each fiscal year. And this can help expand the supply of affordable housing in which families can use tenant-based vouchers or other rental assistance. Other options include some additional enhancements that I found through research and investments the Housing Authority can utilize to improve the Housing Choice Voucher program. So option 2 just includes different options like housing mobility programs, cost assistance, or fee waivers. And all of these enhancements can be used on their own or in conjunction with other options. And then finally, next steps include review by the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners and the San Joaquin County Continuum of Care. And that's all I have. Some of the information might be kind of vague due to time constraints. There's like a lot packed into one presentation and a lot of different options that I found through just researching what different regions in California have pursued in order to help combat this issue, since it's sort of universal throughout the state right now. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily, for the awesome presentation. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, they can unmute or enter them in the chat for Emily.
I have a question. I was wondering how the total available number of vouchers, sort of how that number is defined by jurisdiction.
So in the chart that I have, I broke it down by like the different type of vouchers. There's a whole bunch of them that come from HUD. The most popular by far is definitely the Housing Choice Voucher. And that's the one that most people apply for when they apply for the voucher program. Some of the other vouchers, like a family reunification voucher or a veterans assistant voucher, which is called like VASH, only apply to people who meet certain characteristics. So the Housing Choice Voucher is just by far the most universal one. It's also one of the only tenant-based vouchers. So it's the one that requires people to sort of do their own legwork to find a unit where they can use that voucher. But there's a lot of other ones like the project-based vouchers. It's all very nuanced. It comes from HUD, so it's a little bit confusing.
Awesome. And then I see another question coming in from the chat. Is there anything in local ordinance that addresses income discrimination for protecting voucher holders?
That's actually a really good question. So technically, it is illegal for a landlord to discriminate against a voucher holder because that's what's called source of income discrimination. The problem comes in with the enforcement of that. Our Fair Housing Department in San Joaquin County is unfortunately just super overworked. So they don't really have the capacity to go after landlords who are discriminated against voucher holders. I think another part of the issue also comes into play because a lot of people aren't aware of source of income discrimination, and people who are utilizing vouchers especially don't necessarily have the resource or the legal expertise or the legal knowledge themselves to go after landlords when this sort of discrimination is happening. Also, because our vacancy rate is so low, it's really easy for a landlord to discriminate against someone with a voucher and then immediately fill the unit. So they kind of don't get caught because it's like, it's easy to discriminate right now is I guess the point. It's again, very nuanced and hard to approach, but yeah, it technically is illegal, but people get away with it all the time.
Gotcha. It looks like there's one more question in the chat as well from Isaac. Are there instances in which small landlords, like someone who owns a house and rents it out, accept vouchers?
Yeah, so the majority of our landlords who participate in the Housing Choice Voucher program in San Joaquin County are small scale landlords, because those are the landlords that are most easily reachable. The Housing Authority has really strong existing relationships with a lot of landlords who have actually rented to voucher holders for years, and they experience no issues with it. That's also part of the reason why the Housing Authority pursued a landlord incentive program, to kind of do some outreach to landlords and get more landlords involved and let them know that a tenant, not a unit, who holds a voucher is really no different than any other tenant. The only difference is that the money comes from the federal government and not from someone's paycheck as a traditional lease would have it.
Awesome. Oh, I see another follow-up. Are there ways a trust fund could help? This will have to be the last question, unfortunately.
Yeah, so definitely. A housing trust fund would help expand our supply of affordable housing in the region. So it would definitely help us construct more units. I also think that if we were to implement a housing trust fund and then provide more project-based vouchers for our developers, it would help us get more units that are specifically available to people who need units the most. So for people with low incomes, for voucher holders. So definitely a housing trust fund across the board can help with a lot of issues in San Joaquin County.
Amazing. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, audience, for all the engagement as well. And yeah, Emily is a wealth of knowledge. So that was really great. Let's go ahead and keep things moving. Yeah, so next we're going to hear from Maeve Robinson with Placer County Housing and Transportation. And then after Maeve will be Andrea Mateo, who's serving with the city of Antioch. So go ahead, Maeve, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maeve Robinson, and I'm serving with Placer County Community Development Resource Agency. And today I'll be discussing some successful community engagement strategies for affordable housing based off my experience in the fellowship term, primarily assisting with outreach strategies. So to provide some context, Placer County developed this annual housing work plan back in 2017 that was targeted at eliminating barriers to housing construction and also identifying ways to accelerate the development of affordable and workforce housing. And one focus area of this plan includes activities that are centered specifically on advocacy, relations, and communication. So the pandemic has obviously affected how Placer County is reaching its residents. We're still primarily communicating in a virtual format. So a lot of my work during this fellowship term was looking at ways in which we could continue to engage the community and keep them connected to affordable housing resources in this virtual setting. And so based off my experience working at the county, I determined what I believe are kind of the three vital foundations of community engagement, and I'll run through them briefly right now. But the first would be stakeholder collaboration. So conducting outreach both to internal and external stakeholders to share information about our affordable housing programs and resources, so that way they could pass along this information to their clientele if that's appropriate. The second would be equity and accessibility. So making sure we're inviting as many people as possible into the affordable housing conversation. Some examples of this are, for example, we had a series of down payment assistance webinars in the fall, and we had Spanish translation available both at the webinars themselves and also in the marketing materials we used to promote the event. And then obviously, as the pandemic has been continuing, the county has kind of shifted to more of a hybrid format, but we're still offering virtual options as well for those community members that aren't comfortable attending in-person events. And then finally, I'd like to note also a diversity of outreach tools. So not just exercising one medium, but using a lot of different tools to reach as wide of an audience as possible. So I helped a lot with different press releases, flyers, brochures, our housing website. I was out tabling at events and engaging with community members. We had a number of webinars as well. So really just utilizing as many tools as possible to ensure that we're reaching as many residents as we can. And so next, I'd like to highlight just a couple achievements from my service year. The first is that in May of this year, Placer County hosted its first ever Affordable Housing Month. So during this month, we had 4 different housing webinars, each discussing various housing topics. And in total, we reached 138 residents throughout the county. And then secondly, another achievement I would like to highlight is one of the biggest deliverables that I produced during my fellowship term was a brochure and booklet for our Housing Development Advisory Task Force. So just to provide some brief context, our task force is a volunteer task force comprised of community members with various expertise in housing, and they're going out and looking for possible opportunity sites where affordable housing development may be possible. So this brochure and booklet was kind of a physical way that they could reach out to property owners and land developers and provide them with some more information about the task force and the work that they do and ways in which these community members could help. So before I conclude with my recommendations, I'm going to ask, could we go to the next slide, please? And I just wanted to give a couple examples of some of the outreach materials that I created. So on the left here, we have a flyer I created for our down payment assistance webinars in the fall, and that's the version that was translated into Spanish. And then on the right here is a page from the task force brochure, just kind of summarizing the task force's partners, what the task force does, and ways in which the community can get involved. So if we could go back to the previous slide. Thank you. So to conclude my presentation, I just wanted to leave some recommendations for ways in which Placer County can continue to utilize these successful community engagement strategies. The first would be to regularly update our housing website, especially our What's New section, just making sure we're having as much current information available as possible for our residents. Also continuing to conduct outreach to current stakeholders and new ones as well, just continually informing them of our different programs and resources. I think it would also be neat if Placer County continued to have an annual Affordable Housing Month every year. I think this past year was a pretty big success, and I think it could definitely transform as the years go on. But that being said, I think also having webinars throughout the year as well on different current housing projects and programs will be beneficial as well, just so we're not just limiting that outreach to a specific month of the year. I'd also like to see some more Spanish translation available for future marketing materials and housing events. We really only utilize this for our down payment assistance webinars in the fall, but a portion of our low income population is primarily Spanish speaking. So I think it's important to continue to include them in the conversation as well and use methods of communication that will work for them. And then finally, as the pandemic continues, I think continuing to have a virtual option as well for community workshops and other housing events will be beneficial as well, and just making sure we're reaching as many residents as possible. So that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Maeve. And yeah, if folks want to chime in with questions, they can definitely go for it in the chat or just unmuting.
I had a question. Maeve, I was wondering if you, if there were any kind of sentiments that would come up over and over again when you did engage with community members.
That's a good question. I think most of all it was just gratitude for reaching out and sharing more about these programs. So obviously, like most of California, we have a pretty significant affordable housing crisis here as well. And so I think a lot of them weren't maybe as well aware of these programs. And so really just from all the work that I did, there was a lot of just gratitude and appreciation from these community members and helping them to learn more about these programs, since it's not usually something they're able to find out about that easily. And that was what a lot of my work was helping with, was making sure this information is more easily accessible to these residents.
Awesome. It looks like a couple questions have come in the chat as well. One from Isaac. What has been your favorite form of outreach to conduct and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say probably those bigger marketing materials like brochures and booklets, especially that booklet I just mentioned for the task force. It was definitely more of a challenging one, but I think there's more creative liberty there because beyond writing these forms of marketing materials as well, there's more room to be creative and have a lot of space to work as well. So I definitely say, yeah, more of those kind of larger marketing materials.
And another one, it looks like from Mackenzie. Sounds like a lot of coordination, promotion, and facilitation in your role. Were these new skills you developed, or had you been familiar with these types of activities pre-CivicSpark?
That's a good question. So I didn't have much marketing experience pre-CivicSpark, but my degree is in English. So I do have pretty strong communication skills, I would argue. So that's why I really enjoyed doing this type of work in my role, just because I was really utilizing those writing skills and communication skills that I really built upon in my degree.
Yes, and then I know on the CivicSpark side with our region, I know our newsletter team appreciated those skills as well. Came in pretty clutch. Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Maeve. Amazing presentation. And yeah, we can move right along with our next presenter, who is Andrea Mateo, serving with the city of Antioch. Andrea, take it away when you're ready.
Yes, thanks for the introduction, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Mateo. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am currently a CivicSpark Fellow for the City of Antioch. I work with both the Environmental Resources and Housing Division. And similar to Maeve's presentation, I will be talking about some of the outreach and community engagement that my co-fellow and I have conducted this past year, more specifically in regards to COVID-19 rental assistance. And just to give the audience a brief background on the city of Antioch, around 12.7% of the city's population is considered to be below the federal poverty line, with majority of these individuals coming from communities of color. Additionally, the city has also had one of the highest eviction rates within the Bay Area. And to give you a sense of how high the eviction rate is, data has shown that almost a year and a half into the pandemic, there had been a total of 91 evictions from the county sheriff, compared to Oakland, a city that is 4 times bigger than the city of Antioch, which only had 33 evictions. And given these statistics, there was definitely a need to provide some form of rental assistance to those who were most in need of it. And that's where the program that we promoted came about. The program that we primarily promoted was the California COVID-19 Rent Relief Program. It was a program that was enacted by the state on March 15, 2021. And that's when the program started to accept applications for rent and utility support. And it was helping Californians who were hit hardest by the pandemic. And both tenants and landlords were able to request up to 18 months of assistance, covering the time between April 1, 2020 to March 31, 2022. And in order to ensure that we were promoting this program adequately, but also being able to adjust to the constraints that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our program year, my co-fellow and I did both virtual and in-person outreach for the program. For virtual promotion, we primarily created flyers to post on the city's social media pages, primarily Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We also use the city's Nextdoor account to promote programs to residents. Additionally, the city also has a bi-weekly newsletter. So those who were subscribed to the newsletter were able to find out about the program, and we were able to highlight that consistently throughout the year. And moving on to the in-person promotion that we did, we had primarily done our in-person promotion with different partnered organizations and businesses that had connections to the communities that we primarily wanted to reach out. So for example, you can see my co-fellow and I on the picture there at Cielo Supermarket. We had partnered with this grocery store which was a primarily Hispanic grocery store located in the city of Antioch. So we did outreach in front of the store to promote the program to Spanish-speaking communities. And another organization that we had partnered with this past year was the Celebrate Antioch Foundation. And I guess it was just like right timing, because this year is also the city of Antioch's 150th anniversary. So they had all these free events happening and going on throughout the year. Most of the events were free to the public. So my co-fellow and I often did outreach at these free events, such as the Free Water Park Day, Black Diamond Mines Day, also the 4th of July extravaganza, just to name a few of the events that we've been doing in-person outreach. And in total, we've recorded a total of 10,000 interactions with people, with the city of Antioch this past year and helping to promote the COVID-19 rental assistance program. One of the key takeaways from this experience definitely is the importance of translation and interpretation for different languages. In the city of Antioch, aside from English, the other predominant languages are Spanish and Tagalog. Luckily, my co-fellow speaks Spanish and I speak Tagalog, so we were able to translate that material into both languages. And also when doing in-person outreach, we were able to speak in those languages as well. And another takeaway that I wanted to highlight just from doing the in-person outreach especially was a lack of proficiency in technology for some individuals. So it was always helpful to have like a laptop or a Wi-Fi, like a pocket Wi-Fi in hand, so you could also help people who wanted to apply to the program right there, or to show them like how it is like online, since you would have to apply through it online. And some recommendations that I have moving forward for the city of Antioch is to just always keep track of what went well and didn't go well at each of the events, more of like a pros and cons list. It can give you a sense for what you can do for the next outreach events and whether or not like you can see other fellows in the future take on these different outreach events. Also to just connect with other businesses or other organizations or other stakeholders that could help promote the program. We were fortunate this year to have partnered with Cielos, Antioch Foundation, also Echo Housing and Shelter Inc., but there's definitely more stakeholders out there, such as most likely religious organizations or school clubs, just to name a few that we could have also done outreach for. Overall, I do hope that the city continues to implement and improve on conducting outreach to these communities. But overall, I'm very grateful for the experience at the city of Antioch. And that concludes my presentation. So thank you for coming and listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea, and congrats on a successful year of service. Let's see, looks like we have a question coming in the chat from Dawn. Let's see. What parts of the community engagement work you did were the most meaningful for you and why?
Thanks for the question, Dawn. I think for me, the most meaningful engagement work that I did was definitely doing the in-person outreach and interacting with people in my community, because I'm a Filipina as well, and being able to help other Filipinos within the community that also needed this assistance was definitely something that had me going throughout the service year, that this was like the type of work that I wanted to continue and do. So yeah.
Awesome. And then it looks like a question from Kaylee as well. Excited to have you back for a second year. What do you look forward to most in the next year?
Yeah, so fun fact, I'm actually coming back in the city of Antioch, hired part-time under the housing division. So that's super exciting. Something that I just look forward to this upcoming year is finding other ways to address this housing situation that's happening in Antioch. As I stated in like the brief background that I gave about the evictions, I mean, there has been a lot of evictions happening. And although I feel like the rental assistance program has helped with that, I think there are other ways to also help reduce the number of evictions within the city of Antioch. So trying to explore other ways to go about that. So that's something that I'm looking forward to for the following year. Thanks for that question, Kaylee.
Awesome. That's super exciting for sure, Andrea. Yeah, I guess now we can, we're actually going to circle back to have Lizzy, Havey share the rest of their presentation. Lizzy, I think we actually have enough time where you can just start from the top. I don't think you were that far in. So yeah, whenever you're ready, Lizzy.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep my video off for now, everybody. Sorry about that. But just to kind of start again, my name's Lizzy Havey. I've been working in the city in Arvin as a second-year fellow. So I've been serving the Arvin community for about 2 years now. I work primarily in the planning department, but also with the greater community development department on a number of programs and projects relating to sustainability, active transportation, electrification of our public fleet, a number of different things. Today, I want to talk more about the housing work. So going into the second year with a little bit more expertise, I understood the various funds we were awarded, and now is the point where let's work with the city to see what we can do. I really came on board as an organizational capacity. What can we do with the REAP money, the PLHA, SB2? So I'll kind of get into those different things, but again, we are a small jurisdiction, so we are located southeast of Bakersfield, about 20 miles. It's a small incorporated city, about 21,000. And so, but the rural cities are also hit hard with the different housing crisis and facilities. And I really feel like it's a microscope to larger cities as well, these small rural areas, just because you can see the impacts of the rising rents really fast, people moving from bigger cities to these smaller towns, and the need to expand and grow. So with these different various funding options, primarily from the Department of Housing Community Development, HCD, we wanted to be unique in our approaches, and also something that's going to be applicable to a small jurisdiction that'll be able to fill capacity later on. So I'm going to focus on two main programs, SB2 and the Local Early Action Plan, or LEAP. So when I came on board, both of these applications had already been done, and we had received the money, but we had not implemented anything. We had not moved anything forward. The idea with SB2, which you can see under high level goals, was to update the antiquated zoning code specifically to high density residential development. And we wanted to provide more streamlined options and kind of work with developers to have more multifamily developments. We do have a number currently, but we haven't seen a lot of multifamily development in the last decade. And so that's where the inspiration of SB2 came from. And then with LEAP was really an ADU ordinance, as well as facilitating pre-approved plan sets. And then LEAP also allowed me to work at the city of Arvin. So what we did was put those two together, and the kind of project name was SB2 LEAP Implementation, or Facilitating Housing Opportunities in the City of Arvin. And the way we broke that down was first researching and review. So I looked at the various funds and the different housing priorities that were set out. We looked at what has been used and what hasn't been used. What was the implementation deadline? So SB2 was a high priority for us. It needed to be implemented, all the funding, by the end of this year. And that was the idea of why we wanted to make these two together. So we also want to understand the legislation and the funding allocations, such as like state priorities. So there was a lot of recent state legislation around ADUs and pushing ADUs as one piece of the puzzle to solve the housing crisis. So we are researching different recent legislation. And we also looked to model cities and ordinances. The city of Clovis was big for us as another rural city in the San Joaquin Valley, as well as looking at larger cities like San Diego or even San Jose. Next came program design. The San Joaquin Valley Regional Early Action Planning Grant also allowed for a San Joaquin Valley-wide kind of committee to be formed to provide technical assistance. I really relied on a lot of their expertise and the webinars and the resources they were putting out. And that was a huge asset in considering some of their ADU specific resources and best practices that were developed. Because it was designed specifically for small San Joaquin Valley communities, which is just really important for us to look at. So in that program design, I was looking at a lot of their resources, and I knew I could count on consultants as well. So big research and review before implementing these different programs. What I did was create a request for proposal. for both of these programs for this like SB2 and LEAP implementation. And that required some different technical documents. So drafting the RFP myself, and then once we were able to pick a consultant, also doing the different contracts. And what that led to is what we're currently at, which is the implementation and coordination. And so we're just working with the different consultants now. We're looking to update the zoning code. We're estimating about 5 to 10 new ADUs built per year. We have 3 pre-approved ADU plan sets that are getting worked out through our consultants and our architects. And a big part of SB2 is also streamlining new multifamily housing development. I know that's kind of a quick wrap up, but the last piece of the puzzle, which was our PLHA formula allocation, that was providing COVID rent and mortgage relief payments, but for the next 4 years, it's actually going to provide low interest loans to homeowners that are looking to build ADUs. So with our full ADU program, with the ADU plan sets, it's also going to be an ADU guidebook, and then we're also going to be using that funding for those low interest loan programs for our housing for the homeowners. So it's really a big encapsulated program wrapped up in one. If we want to go to the next slide, that was some of my housing work. I just wanted to touch briefly on my volunteer engagement work. It's on the next slide if possible. And so this was just highlighting another big aspect of my project this year. We had over 100 volunteers show up. We were working in the parks, which was a big, which was really important because of COVID. We had to turn off, the city didn't want people to come to public spaces. So we're hoping to deter people, and then that resulted in our parks not being a safe space. And so this was really rebuilding from COVID, resilience, having people come out, work on the projects, and celebrate upcoming park renovations from a big grant that was awarded as well. So overall, lots to work on. Happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Lizzy. I'm glad it worked out where we were able to hear the rest of your presentation for sure. That was great. So yeah, it looks like a question has already come in through the chat. Thank you, Christine. Let's see. Are the loans funded with SB2/LEAF or a different source? Just curious how that is being implemented in Arvin.
So it's being implemented. We contracted with self-help enterprises in facilitating the loan program, and it's actually being the loans are funded through PLHA formula allocation that was awarded, I believe, in 2020. And so again, the first year was used for kind of COVID relief for mortgage and rent payments that was specific for the city. And then in the coming years, it's going to be low interest and I believe forgivable, but I don't want to be quoted on that up until a certain point. Self-help enterprises is the main contract working on that. And so that will be formed in together with our ADU guidebook, which we're still creating right now with our consultants.
Awesome. Looks like another question is coming from Isaac. Have you successfully administered any PLHA loans? We have that product in Truckee and have had trouble getting folks here to take the money.
No, we haven't. We were able to, we had our consultants on board starting in about May. So we've had a lot of different kickoff meetings and wrapping up different programs. Our priority right now is SB2, and so that's updating our zoning code, as well as streamlining some multifamily housing like development. And so they're going to be working with a number of developers in the area, kind of seeing what's the cause for delay, and also doing some initial environmental impact reports. So we haven't started administering any of the PLHA loans yet for the ADUs. That's kind of in our next steps.
Awesome. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Yeah, and thank you, Lizzy, for the awesome presentation, and congrats on your second year, completing your second year of service. Amazing. So yeah, I guess that's it. That's all the fellows for today. Thanks everybody for your presentations. Thank you, audience, for all the engagement. It was really, really awesome to just hear more from fellows and kind of pick their brains on different things. And yeah, that's a wrap. So one giant final congratulations to all the fellows who presented today. Thank you for the audience again for just being here and offering your attention and engagement and support and encouragement. So this concludes today's poster symposium session. Please continue to support our fellows by reaching out to them on LinkedIn or by email. All fellow contact information is available on our website, and it's actually right here through this link. You can reach out to them that way. And then also, if you would like to attend additional poster sessions that are going throughout the end of this week, please visit our website, and I'll put the link here for that as well, for the other sessions coming up, as well as you can sign up for our graduation celebration on August 11th. And then I should say that tomorrow's session will also be at 1 p.m. And it is going to be covering projects or fellows working on projects within the energy space, so clean mobility and green infrastructure, which will be very interesting for sure to hear more about from them. And recordings of these sessions will be available on our website and within a follow-up email sent to all attendees during the last week of July, which I guess is this week, so probably after the last session this week. Awesome. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. Thank you all again for being here, and have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.